Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cloud Talk Live. My name is Jeff DeVerter. I am the Chief Technology Evangelist here at Rackspace, and more importantly, for the next few minutes, I'm your host. And yes, I am getting over a little cold. I feel fine, but I do not sound fine today. Well, folks, coming up, we've got Earth Day here in April, and the United States celebrates that. And it is an amazing thing to think about how we can utilize all of the things in our lives to help make sure that this world, well, sticks around while we're here, but especially for those that are going to come after us. And more, technology is a piece of how that happens. And the way that we address technology is absolutely a key in figuring out how we make these solutions that are sustainable in the long run. Now, Mohammed, Mohasen has already figured it out. He knows the routine around here. Introduce yourselves, folks. I forgot to say that. Maybe I am a little foggy from that cold I had. So go ahead, introduce yourselves. Hey, Susan's here. Glad to see you, Susan. And introduce yourselves. Tell me who you are. Tell me where you are. And we're really excited to have you here today. Now, more than that, I'm excited to have our CTO of Rackspace here. His name is Srini Koushik. Srini has a long history in technology. He's been on the podcast before. He's been on this live stream before. We will address a little bit of his technology history, but all of that as we move forward in figuring out how we use technology to help make this a more sustainable type of a world. Now, I've got a fancy microphone here. I'm also out in the country. You may hear a rooster. He's outside my window trying to get my attention, I think, and wants to be a podcast star. Well, with that, Daniel, let's go ahead and bring up Srini on stage. Srini, welcome back, I should say, to Cloud Talk Live.
Jeff, thanks for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, Srini, I bragged a little bit about you and your career. Why don't we just kind of give everybody a little understanding of what brought you here into Rackspace? And I know one of those employers that is of note is IBM. You spent a little bit of time there.
Yeah. Well, very, very quickly, it's 35 years, even going quickly was going to take up time, right? But I am at the core a technologist. I started my career as a technologist and a software architect, and I'm proud to say 35 years later, I'm still a technologist and a software architect. And that journey has taken me through, 4 stints as CIO at various organizations, Fortune 100 organizations and others. My 4th stint being right now. All of IT and information security and everything else rolls up through me here at Rackspace. But in addition to that, I've done a startup, had a good exit from the startup, and I've also been at I built my technical chops in the IBM of the olden days, right? Like where really it was very much focused on technology. It's actually, by the way, on the IBM front, it's great to see Arvind bring back the technical mojo at IBM. So that's kind of a little bit of my background. I came here to Rackspace because Rackspace is an iconic brand, right? Like it's, our history and our legacy is of technology innovation, of open source, and those areas. And as the world has changed around us, we have to evolve and we have to kind of still figure out how to be relevant in today's world. And that challenge is exciting. And I've been here now for about 14 months, and every day feels like a new day.
Every day really does. Now, folks, when Srini says that he is still a technologist at heart, what you don't see necessarily, if you go out and you check him out on LinkedIn, what you'll find is certification after certification. And these aren't certifications from 10 and 20 years ago. He is staying current with all of the latest technologies, whether it's hyperscalers, whether it's data, whether it's security, fill in the blank. Srini's got his finger on the heartbeat of what's happening. Now, Srini, that brings me to maybe the first technology point. And there's a stat in a deck that we share when we talk about multi-cloud. I want to talk about multi-cloud for just a second. And it's a stat that I believe it's 81% of companies have a multi-cloud strategy. And this is driving us towards sustainability in our conversation of the morning. But I think it's important for us to talk about what multi-cloud is and why companies have a multi-cloud strategy.
Yep. Well, not to sound again like that old guy, But 35 years ago when I started, everything, all computing was in one box on a mainframe, right? And you could pretty much do everything you needed on that front. And you fast forward through the last 35 years, we've kind of gotten to the point where computing has found the right place for it to live, right? Like not everything belongs on the mainframe. So, it's kind of evolved. We went through the whole client server revolution to the last decade where it's been focused on the cloud, right? And so on the cloud, what cloud enables is just innovation at a speed we've not seen before. Companies that were limited by how they can enter into a market because of the extensive capital requirements can actually get in and put a solution out there. So what that means for us today is you have some phenomenal choices for where you can run your workloads that actually, are you find the right home for your workloads is the way I talk about it. But in addition to that, for those applications and solutions that you don't need, you're able to go back in and pick them up from a SaaS provider, like whether like people pick up a lot of HR stuff today from places like Workday and UKG, right? Like they pick up a lot of the sales and marketing capabilities from Salesforce or for IT capabilities from ServiceNow. So what that's done is, as a CIO, you are by definition operating in a multi-cloud environment.
That's right.
You may have your own workloads running on a hyperscaler. You have other workloads that you're running in a private cloud environment, and you're sourcing some of the other workloads from these SaaS providers that are running in their own cloud environments.
Yeah. So
the ability to manage and run that is almost table stakes for today, and that's why you see that high of a number, 80+% saying they operate in a multi-cloud environment.
That's right. And one of the things that does is when there is so much technology on the menu and a technologist has all of these tools in the tool chest, they can be lured into. I mean, technologists are technologists. They want to dig in. They want to create hard things, solve hard problems, and they want to create solutions that really are impressive. And when you have so many tools in the tool chest, it can be alluring to create a very technically complex thing. But that leads us into the first really challenge when we think about sustainability, Srini, and that is these applications, we've got to be able to manage and run them over time. They need to be able to be sustained by our operations team.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Again, some of the terms I'll use are things that many of you have heard me use a lot of times. A lot of technologists get so fascinated with the day zero and day one activities.
That's
like
right.
All of this planning and picking this cool technology and building it out is where all of their energy goes and like the passion goes. They get up at conferences, talk about these things and others. But the reality is, if you think about the life cycle of an application, it starts 95% of it starts from day two and onwards. Like the minute you put it into production, what it does on a day-to-day basis is fundamentally what an application delivers to any business and the outcomes that it delivers. So if we get attracted, like you pointed out, if we get attracted to a lot of the latest shiny object, right? Yeah. Or I'm a really smart guy who's building applications. Let me stretch the limit to which I can kind of build these applications, and I admire the complexity that I've already built in, like or that I'm building in. What you're actually doing is you're setting up the organization that you work for a longer-term failure. Because you may be the smartest person in the room, and you probably are, but others are what you've done by picking a more complex solution is you've made it tougher and more expensive to manage. Yeah. But you've also made it more expensive by the fact that you can't find too many skills in that piece, right? And then we come back and complain about things like, oh, there's a talent war going on, right? There's a war that goes on for talent when there's a shortage. And the shortage is actually created by the complexity you've created. Yeah. And once you kind of understand that, you start to build solutions, you start to build applications that are a lot more sustainable in the economic sense of the word, right? They're more sustainable because you not only put something in that adds value to the business, you've made it easier for them to support and maintain it for the longer run. And that's the key thing that we got to remember when we build solutions.
So that is one of the core pillars when we think about what is a sustainable application, what does sustainable IT look like. Now we're here this episode in honor of Earth Day. We've got folks literally from all over the earth who've joined us. There's lots of folks from all over India, some rackers, some non-rackers. Kelly, our new Chief Human Resource Officer, is here. Kelly, we're so glad that you're here. Can't wait till you're here. And Boston is here, Houston is here, Qatar is here. Thank you all for being a part of it. But Srini, let's dive into really when we think about sustainability, everybody's brain goes towards all things green. Let's talk about how tech is helping things be more green. How are these applications, as we refactor and retool them to better our business, how can we do that in a green way?
Yeah, great point. And then it may be surprising for a lot of people listening to a CTO say it this way. The only green technology is when you don't use technology. Because the minute you start using technology, you're consuming natural resources, you're consuming electricity, power, heating, everything that it takes to run this. And actually, the demands of technology are going up considerably. Everybody loves to talk about generative AI and ChatGPT and large language learning models.
Yeah.
If people understood the amount of energy that's consumed to actually build and train one of those models, right, you could power cities for days, based on how much energy you're actually using to be able to train that model. So, I think it helps technologists to keep that in mind, that like anything that we do actually does consume resources. Doesn't mean you have to kind of completely avoid it. But it's just like what you do at home, right? Like you see the lights that I've got running up there and others, and they're all LED bulbs. I've got to use these bulbs because again, if it's going to be running all through the day, let me optimize my consumption, right? Or when I leave the room, I turn the switch off, and all the devices that you see in here turn off, right? And because if you've got most American homes are built without a power switch, so when you have devices like your phone plugged into the wall, you're consuming ghost power, right? And so there's a certain amount of power that it takes to drive that. So taking steps like how you are taking it in your own personal world, if you choose to drive a hybrid or an electric, you're making choices to be more responsible with how you consume natural resources.
Yes.
IT and applications are no different. When you build applications, we tend to kind of look at it, and this is part to you got to pay attention to the day two and beyond, right?
That's right.
They put applications into production. What type of, it's not just economic sustainability that I talked about, but it is also about like how much power is it consuming? Have I sized the infrastructure correctly so that I'm only consuming what I need, right? Or as opposed to over provisioning it. And even if you're running in a cloud environment with Amazon or with AWS or with Azure or any of those guys, you should be paying attention to which regions get the most clean power from, right? Many regions, GCP, AWS, Azure, they tell you about where they're getting their power sources from. Is it renewable energy? Is it green energy? So there are choices that we can make as applications developers, as infrastructure engineers, that actually consume these resources more responsibly, right? And then, just like I told you, walk out, turn the switch off and go through. If I'm running a dev test environment, am I shutting it down once my developers have left? Or do I keep that running, right? Those are the types of things that we've got to engineer into our applications. We got to think about it consciously as part of the build process and engineer it in so that you actually are building resources that actually deliver the benefits, because I don't want people thinking I hate technology. Technology and the advances in technology have delivered so many good things for humanity.
Right.
And it's going to keep doing that. But what we can do is, in addition to those benefits, it'll be pretty cool if we actually looked at it as in a very responsible way as it relates to our environment and start using it that way.
Yeah. So, Srini, I'm hearing a couple of things in what you just said. The first is we need to look at every resource as a finite resource. There is no utility. You just turn the switch and it's always on, and there's no impact to flipping the switch. It's just a common sense type of a thing. The second is there really is no magic in thinking about how to create sustainable applications or stuff over time. It's the common sense stuff. I love your analogy. Just as when you leave the room, you're going to turn off the light. If your application's not being used, engineer it in a way that it can turn off the light. It just makes sense. It becomes what you oftentimes refer to as a non-functional requirement. Let's make sure that only the resources that are needed are on. The analogy I'll use a lot is I brag about my wife. My wife is an amazing baker, and she can make the best cake in the world, but she doesn't leave the oven on 24 hours a day, waiting for the moment when she wants to make a cake. She turns the oven on, she preheats that sucker, makes an amazing cake, and turns it off. And then that, I think, is an amazing analogy as we think about our applications, because these resources are finite. Then there's that level 2, in that the resources that we're going to use, are they the most efficient resources? Should I have an electric oven? Should I have a gas oven? Should I have whatever? Quite frankly, I have a solar power here at the house, and I tell her to bake during the middle of the day when the sun is high in the sky and it's free power. So these are I love the thought of, let's choose regions for our hyperscale consumption that are in areas where there is the most renewable power that's available.
Right. And you can actually go one step further. I love the way you described the analogy on which type of oven you use and when do you use it. The same way, applications developers, it's not just all on infrastructure. Applications developers and application architects can actually start putting sustainability first as well, right? I go on to LinkedIn and I see every one of these things on microservices this and microservices that and others. And don't get me wrong, microservices is one of the most powerful architectures you have. But just like with great power comes great responsibility, you don't throw microservices at everything, because what it does is, first of all, it is very powerful. So it also is, when you start thinking about that and the service mesh and everything else like that, the power consumption is higher than an event-driven architecture. When you start thinking about serverless deployments and others, when you start thinking about the comparisons of one architecture versus another, there's actually choices you can make. Like things like event-driven and serverless are a lot more sustainable from an economic standpoint. It's not as complex as microservices. So these choices that we make in how we build systems, how we modernize applications, all matter. And given that we're doing it at this time where we're dealing with finite resources, it's really not a nice to have. It is an imperative. We've got to start thinking about it that way as we move forward.
Not only is it, well, let's talk about imperative for 1 second. And there's another pillar of sustainability we need to get to, but let's talk imperative for a second. Imperative from 2 dynamics, if not more. The first is, how do we make sure that we treat this environment the best as possible? But the other imperative is, these are real business drivers. They have a financial impact on how these businesses run. Let's unpack that just for 1 quick second. This imperative of making sure that and from both these angles, both from the environment as well as from an economic side on the business.
Yeah. So look, I will spend just a little bit more on the economic side of the business, right? Like, because it's just think about it this way. I love, the reading about things, and people start talking about, look, whenever you have a scarcity problem, scarcity drives up costs, right? Like, because it's a demand versus supply issue, and that drives up costs. So when you have a complex architecture that only a handful of people understand, right? Like it drives up the cost of resources because there's a scarcity in the number of people who can actually deliver that complex architecture, right? So the way to kind of flip that on its head is to flip it from a scarcity problem to an abundance problem. And the way you flip it on its head is by picking technologies that are more inclusive.
Yes.
So, I can tell you, having worked with so many people over the years, training somebody who's got skills and getting them onto things like serverless architectures and event-driven architectures is far more easier than training them on a really complex, microservices-driven architecture. Same thing applies to the infrastructure setup and everything else that you have to do. So by making those choices, you're not only doing the right thing from a green standpoint, you're also making the right thing from now as an organization, I can go do things that bring a lot more people into the workforce, right? One of the things that Rackspace got recognized for is in the fall of last year, we ran a AWS certification program thinking that, look, we'll give another 150 people a way to get into to the amazing world of AWS and how it's growing. And we ran that. You know the results. We thought we were going to get about 100 in 3 months. We got over 550 in that time. 550 people not at the basic level of AWS certification. This is associate architect and professional architect, and these are really advanced skills to kind of take people through.
That's right.
Why is that possible? I think you start thinking about the type of solutions you pick. Now you've made more people. You've opened up the opportunity to more people.
Yes, right.
Now has converted it from a scarcity problem to an abundance problem. It's the way
that really is that third level of sustainability, that third pillar, and that is how do we ensure that we're bringing as many people along as possible, and that is the right thing to do, but it's also an advantage to a business who does that because they ultimately, like us now, have access to more architects than we had before. These individuals have access to a job that is a much more economically beneficial thing to them, and also just as generally helping their career.
Yeah. It helps them become more economically viable into the future.
That's right.
Just making sure that their skills are current and they're relevant as you actually go through.
And we're doing that in a global fashion. You've seen in the comments here, we've got folks, a 24-month racker from India. You're seeing folks coming in from all over the world. We've got employees everywhere. We go where the talent is. We go where the opportunity is.
But what you just described, Jeff, is another scarcity to abundance conversion, right? Like, if you kind of look at it within a certain geography for our skills, then you are always going to be limited by where it is. Like, if you start thinking about it globally as look, the human beings are it is a replenishable resource. It is a resource that is still that's still growing across the globe. How do you kind of expand the opportunity is a big part of the sustainability discussion. The one piece we haven't touched on, like that I talk about with the sustainability side, the 3 E's that the World Economic Forum talks about: environmental, economic, and equitable sustainability. And I want to touch on equitable part because with the growing adoption, fascination, whatever it is you want to call of AI and generative AI that we're seeing in the market, it's going to be extremely important that we pay attention to equity. Right, because AI, no matter what you're talking about, whether it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep learning models, whatever it is, it's built on the information we've accumulated so far.
Yes.
And whether we like it or not, there's biases that are built into the data that we've accumulated. Right, the most common example people know is we had. There's a certain way we score credit risk in the U.S. And we've used it for 30 plus years to kind of determine who gets a mortgage and who doesn't get a mortgage. What interest rate we charge for certain credit scores and other types of things. It's a good way of quantifying something that is very esoteric. It gives you a way to quantify it.
Yeah.
But the reality is, the inherent biases that are actually built into the data. Well, I'm going to charge you a higher mortgage rate because you live in a certain zip code that has got a different piece. That's already baked into the mortgages that were given and not given. So now, if you actually have an AI training itself on this data, we shouldn't be surprised to see that the AI have some of the same biases we've had over the last few years as human beings. So it is extremely important as we adopt AI, as we start to look at technology and make technology be accessible to people with disabilities and things like that. The equity piece of it is something we have to do, because otherwise we will leave a very large, portion of the population behind. Don't think about it as a population you can just serve. We talked about the abundance problem, right? If they are doing well, we get more people who actually can participate in this great thing that we do from a technology standpoint. But we got to be really, really careful about the equity side of things.
It's very true. Srini, we are coming up on the top of the hour. I know you have a tight schedule. I know our audience has a tight schedule. So I want to thank you for being a part of the program here today. Absolutely want to have you back and continue this conversation. It's not a one and done, that's for sure.
Yeah. Same here, Jeff. Have me over. I'd be glad to be back anytime. Happy Earth Day, everyone. And let's remember, as Jeff pointed out, it's a finite resource. Let's be judicious about how we use it, and let's do our best as technologists to kind of help with the long-term sustainability of the planet.
Yeah, and maybe turn off the tech and get outside and get your hands dirty. Go outside and enjoy some Earth.
Or play the guitar.
Or play some, better yet. All right, everybody, thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day. We are back next week. We'll be talking about, well, things going on with Microsoft and what's happening in their hyperscale cloud. So hope to see you then. Have a great day.